Good morning. I'm going to talk about the midpoint and endpoint formulas today. Let me get it all zoomed in. Okay, so first we need to define again the words midpoint and endpoint. This is an endpoint, it's at the end of the segment, and this is an endpoint at the end of a segment. And of course, right there in the middle, that would be the midpoint. The midpoint breaks a segment into two congruent pieces, and in geometry we make little marks like this to show that they are congruent to each other. If we had multiple sets of congruent segments, then we would put two dashes to show which ones match up to each other. The midpoint formula actually results in a coordinate because it's a point. So what you're going to do is you're going to add the x coordinates from the endpoints and divide by 2. So you're going to take the average of the endpoints, which makes sense because you're trying to find the one right in the middle, and then the average of the y's. Some people will put subscripts in the formula, x1 plus x2, y1 plus y2. I don't tend to do that because it's easier for me to remember x plus x over y over 2 plus y, or comma y plus y over 2. But if you like the subscripts, add them in. All it means is this is endpoint 1, this is endpoint 2, x from this plus x from that divided by 2, y plus this plus y plus that divided by 2. All right, so let's use it. To find the midpoint of these endpoints, we're going to use the formula x plus x over 2, comma y plus y over 2. I would recommend writing down the formula every single time until you are fantastic at it and you don't need to anymore. So we're going to take 8 plus 4 over 2. And let me get a highlighter real quick so I can make sure that's really clear. I'm using this 8 and this 4, the x's on top, comma, 4 plus 5 over 2. And again, I want to make sure that's clear. We're using the y coordinates for that one. And then all you have to do is simplify. So 8 plus 4 over 2 would be 12 over 2, comma 9 over 2. And we can simplify, so the actual answer is 6, comma 9 over 2. Apparently I didn't leave myself enough room here. So that's how you just basically find the midpoint if you know the endpoints. Obviously, you can do it from a graph too. First, you need to tell what the coordinates of those points are. You should not eyeball it, even though we're pretty accurate that way. You should find the actual midpoint. So this coordinate is -3, 4. And this one is 2, 0. And we're going to use the same formula, x plus x over 2, y plus y over 2. So our x's in this case are -3 and 2. So -3 plus 2 over 2. And our y's, 4 plus 0 over 2. And simplify, so we're going to end up with -1/2 and 4 over 2, which can be simplified further. So the midpoint is 1/2, comma 2. And if you look at the graph, you can see if we go over to -1/2 and 2, that's pretty much exactly where you would have eyeballed it as well. All right, we're going to switch over to endpoint, and then we'll do a little bit of practice after that, and then you can do the maze or whatever other midpoint practice you have after that. Please take a highlighter and highlight the word endpoint because the instructions will be different if you use the endpoint. We could use the midpoint formula and do this whole algebra thing, but it's much easier to use this chart, EME, endpoint, midpoint, endpoint. So what we'll do is we'll draw the chart for every problem, endpoint, midpoint, endpoint. Very simple. And we want to fill things in. Be careful though, because the endpoint and the midpoint may not always be listed in that order. They might list the midpoint first. And if that happens, you need to be very careful that you put it in the right spot. The endpoint is 17, 2. So we're really basically doing X, Y here. I don't usually label that, but it's there. And then the midpoint is 3, 6. And all you have to do is find the difference. How did you go from 17 to 3? Well, we subtracted 14. And so we want to subtract 14 again, because it's the same distance away from that one. And that's negative 11. Okay, we're going to do the same for the y's. To go from 2 to 6, we add 4. So we're going to add 4 more. That's 10. So the endpoint, the other one, would be negative 11, 10. Okay, if you need to take some time to pause that and write that down or re-listen, go ahead and do that. I'm just going to make up some coordinates here. So let's say we're going to have a midpoint negative 2, 5, and the endpoint 7, 14. We're going to make the chart, endpoint, midpoint, endpoint. Notice in this example, the midpoint is listed first. So we need to make sure that goes in the midpoint column or row. And then the endpoint would go here. Even though it's listed afterwards, it doesn't matter because we're just looking for the same distance apart. The difference between 7 and negative 2 is minus 9. So we're going to subtract 9 again and get negative 11, which is just a coincidence because I made that up. It's not always going to be negative 11. I just made these coordinates up and it worked out that way. To go from 14 down to 5, we would subtract 9. So we need to subtract 9 again. 5 minus 9 is negative 4. So the endpoint is negative 11, negative 4. All right, again, if you need to pause or go back, that's fine. I'm going to go through a couple word problems with you, and then we'll be all finished. Troop 175 is designing their new campground by first mapping everything on a coordinate grid. They have found a location for the mess hall and for their cabins. They want the bathrooms to be halfway between these two. Halfway is a key word that you want the midpoint. What will the coordinates be? Well, we need the coordinates of the cabins. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 3. And we need the coordinate of the mess hall. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're going to use the formula. X plus x over 2, y plus y over 2. Our x's this time are 6 and negative 4. Our y's are 3 and negative 1. Okay. I could have also written negative 4 plus 6 or negative 1 plus 3. It doesn't matter because addition is commutative. All right, 6 plus negative 4 is 2. 3 plus negative 1 is 2. So the midpoint would be at 1, 1. Right there. That's where the bathrooms would be. All right. Next. CD has an endpoint at 2, negative 1. I would recommend drawing this thing. CD has an endpoint at 2, negative 1. And a midpoint at 8, 3. What is closest to the length of CD? Well, you know from another video that length means we need the distance formula. So we're actually going to have to do two things here. First, we need to figure out, well, we can do it one of two ways. We can either figure out this endpoint and do the distance, or we could do the distance of this piece and then double it. But because we're working on midpoint right now, I'm going to go with the midpoint or the endpoint formula. All right, so one endpoint is 2, negative 1. The midpoint is 8, 3. We need to add 6, so we're going to add 6 more. 8 plus 6 is 14. 1 to negative, or negative 1 to 3 is adding 4.